Daemon gave us these cloaks, and they're gold no matter how you turn them. Luther Largent to Gawain Hightower, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, the Red Dragon and the Gold. The Gold Cloaks are maybe the most famous city watch, not just in Westeros, but in the whole known world. Few city watches have become so integral to the management of a city, but more so deeply within the political fabric of Westeros itself. In essence, a city watch is meant to keep the peace within a city and ensure law and order is kept. While larger the city watch needs to be to manage it. Even smaller towns in Westeros have their own town watches that function in a similar manner, with the watches in smaller seats, often made up of the household guard of the lord of the town. Even smaller settlements might forego a watch altogether, with law and order maintained by the lord and his men personally. The bigger the city, the bigger the problem, and the larger the watch needs to be to tackle it. And while the Gold Cloaks at King's Landing do a decent job at keeping the peace most of the time, they are not infallible and have their own blind spots and forms of corruption that have become all but impossible to root out. As far as we can tell, during the early development of King's Landing, during the reigns of King Aegon the Conqueror and King Aenys, the household guard of House Targaryen seemed to have partially acted in the capacity of the city watch. But as the city grew so quickly, it became clear there would not be enough men to maintain control of this growing town. From what is implied, the City Watch was formally created during the early reign of King Maegor the Cruel, or at the very least, that's the earliest reference we have of a formal King's Landing City Watch. It seems at this time the commander of the City Watch was a man loyal to King Maegor, as after Maegor's death and King Jaehaerys' claim to the throne, he had the commander arrested, appointing a man of his own choosing, specifically Lord Carl Corbray. But in around 59 AC, Westeros was struck by a sickness known as the Shivers, with Lord Carl being one of the high-profile people at court to die of it. But not only did the City Watch lose their commander, many men of the Watch were stricken down as well. All this would leave the streets of King's Landing falling into anarchy, with no form of law and order for weeks, until the Shivers passed, and what remained of the Watch were able to regain control of the streets. Some of the poorer slums, such as Flea Bottom, took even longer to stabilise, with arguments made that they never truly have been. While of course the City Watch at King's Landing was functional and did a job, it really changed into the Gold Cloaks we know today during the early reign of King Viserys I Targaryen, who appointed his wayward younger brother Prince Daemon as commander of the Watch, and giving him a remit to reform and rework how the City Watch functioned in order to ensure they could effectively do their jobs. Prince Daemon officially took command in 104 AC. The first thing he sought to do was give his men better equipment, as much of what they had access to at this point was either ridiculously old or not fit for purpose. He also wanted to give an identifiable look and give the men of the Watch something to be proud to serve in and proud to be a part of. He gave each man a gleaming gold cloak, and it's from this cloak the Watch gained its nickname, the Gold Cloaks, as they have been known ever since. The weapons he issued were much better than the rusty old swords or clubs used before. Daemon gave each man a gleaming new dirk, short swords and cudgels. There were 2,000 gold cloaks at the time, and all this new equipment came at a great cost, but a cost King Viserys was willing to pay if it kept Daemon out of trouble. The men of the Watch loved Daemon for all he had given them, and were deeply loyal to him. But even so, Daemon used his position for his own gain, drinking and whoring in the darkest places of the city, with his interpretation of law and punishment seen as heavy-handed, with frequent bloody midnight raids to root out crime. Those he judged guilty were often punished quickly and without trial, and these punishments brutal themselves. It is believed much of this factored into the souring of Daemon's relationship with the hand of the king, Otto Hightower, who urged the king to remove his brother from the role of commander. Ultimately, Daemon would be removed as the commander of the Watch, not by Otto's hand, but by his own, after his infamous King for a Day speech after the death of Queen Aemma Arryn and the newborn son of King Viserys. It's unclear what happened to the Gold Cloaks between 105 AC and the start of the Dance of the Dragons, but at its onset it appears that they were initially loyal to the Greens and King Aegon II. But the Greens were faced with a problem. As far as they were aware, the officers may have been loyal, but the same might not be said for the rest of the rank and file members of the Watch, who had mostly been recruited by Daemon, and these were the same men who had shown him fierce loyalty. It meant that when it came time for the real fight for the city, the Watch could turn to the Blacks in an instant. Sir Luther Largent was appointed commander at the start of the war, but Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, named his own son Sir Gawain as Luther's second in command, which suggests he did not wholly trust Sir Luther. In the end, this would actually be a huge misstep, as Otto's instincts were right. When the Blacks finally marched on King's Landing, Luther Largent led a coup in support of the Blacks and personally killed Gawain Hightower. As history shows us, the Blacks struggled to hold King's Landing in what became known as the Moon of Madness, or the Moon of the Three Kings. After Luther was killed during the riots, Sir Balon Birch became the new commander. The Mudfoot garrison, stationed at the Rivergate, or Mudgate, joined the Hedge Knight and would-be kingmaker Perkin the Flea, who declared their allegiance to Tristan Truefire, one of the three pretender kings, then flew his banner above the River Gate. The garrison stationed at the Gate of the God was overwhelmed by Perkin's men. As Rhaenyra fled to King's Landing, 20 Gold Cloaks accompanied her, but half of them deserted on the road to Rosby, and the remainder stayed at Duskendale when she sailed for Dragonstone. Sir Perkin became the commander of the City Watch and was pardoned for his role in the Moon of Madness by King Aegon II after he had recaptured King's Landing. At the start of the reign of King Aegon III, much like during the Shivers that decimated the ranks of the Gold Cloaks during the reign of King Jaehaerys, many Gold Cloaks died during the Winter Fever. When you add in the number of men who were killed during the Moon of Madness, the Watch was barely functioning, so Lord Unwin Peake, Lord Protector of the Realm, added 500 of his own men to the City Watch, until new recruits could be found and trained. While this of course seems very generous of Lord Unwin Peake, by doing so, he ensured a large bulk of the rank and file of the City Watch answered directly to him, maintaining and ensuring his own power and position. Later, during what became known as the Lycene Spring, George Graceford admitted that Sir Lucas Legard, the Gold Cloaks commander, and 6 of the 7 gate captains had conspired against King Aegon III and Prince Viserys, once again bringing into question exactly how loyal the men of the City Watch truly were. The reputation of the Gold Cloaks and their effectiveness further declined over the next few decades until a new low was reached during the reign of King Aegon IV, known to the pages of history as Aegon the Unworthy. Aegon promoted lickspittles within the Watch and used them as go-betweens to make sure brothels were available for his lust. It took more than a year for Aegon's son and successor, King Daemon II, to reorganise the City Watch after his father's death, and even then it was still a shadow of what it had once been at its peak. By the time Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne in the wake of the downfall of House Targaryen, the City Watch as an institution was now widely known to be corrupt and for its brutal approach to peacekeeping. The people of King's Landing had lost its trust with the Gold Cloaks, and in some areas of the city, crime ran rampant. So much so the presence of Gold Cloaks in the darkest slums was a rare sight. King Robert Baratheon continued the institution of the Gold Cloaks and did very little to remove the rot from within, if anything, worsening it, by appointing Janos Slynt, their commander, after the death of Manly Stokeworth. During his time as commander of the Gold Cloaks, Janos was widely known for taking bribes and selling positions and promotions. By the end of his tenure, over half of the officers were paying him part of their salaries. Lord John Arryn, the Hand of the King, discovered this and had 2 men who were willing to come forward to testify against Janos, but both were found dead a short time later, and no further men were willing to come forward. King Robert recognised Janos' corruption, but he allowed him to remain in his position, as he argued his successor could very well be worse. The king's brother, Lord Stannis, felt that Lord Peter Baelish had convinced Robert to retain Janos Slynt. He believed that as long as Slynt was in power, the Gold Cloaks would continue to flounder. The fickle loyalty of Janos Slynt would later play a huge role in what started the War of 5 Kings. After Robert Baratheon's death, Peter Baelish, the Master of Coin, informed Hand of the King Eddard Stark he would make certain the Gold Cloaks are loyal to him in the power struggle that was about to occur between Queen Cersei Lannister and Eddard. With a bribe of 6,000 gold coins, But in truth, Peter bribes Janos Slynt to support Cersei, which is ultimately successful when Janos and 100 Gold Cloaks accompany Eddard to the throne room and betray him, killing the Winterfell guardsman. Slynt is then rewarded by being named Lord of Harrenhal, but is later exiled to the Wall by the acting hand of the king, Tyrion Lannister, for his corruption and potential betrayal. Janos' replacement is Sir Jacelyn Bywater, an honourable veteran of the Greyjoy Rebellion who helped Tyrion prepare the city in defence of the impending invasion of Stannis Baratheon. Towards the end of his time as commander of the City Watch, Sir Janos had tripled the number of Gold Cloaks, making them 6,000 strong. While this may seem like a good idea on the surface, the truth of the matter is there wasn't enough resources to support that many watchmen. This meant the new watchmen were poorly trained, with many being drunks, brutes or cravens, who joined for the promise of bread and coin. Tyrion believes that only a quarter of them, around 1,500, were reliable as actual soldiers in a fight. When Stannis arrives and the Battle of the Blackwater begins, the Watch constitutes the bulk of the defending force of the city. When King Joffrey withdraws from the walls, the men break, as Tyrion had expected. The commander Jacelyn Bywater did attempt to rally them, but is killed by his own men on the cusp of success. While the Battle of the Blackwater was won, the reputation of the Gold Cloaks who defended the city did not improve, with old patterns of behaviour continuing as they always had done. While Prince Daemon did reform the Gold Cloaks and give them a sense of purpose, even then there was brutality and bribery. But Daemon, being a natural leader of men, was able to keep them in line and make them an effective unit. Over the decades, issues with the Gold Cloaks have never really been addressed, and it's all perfectly summarised by how easily Sir Janos Slynt was bought and sold multiple times over, and how willing he was to sell himself at the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings.